Chapter 15. The office of the Bronze Groves President, Mr. Amoroso, was located at the Grand Concourse, and for all the worrying Michael had done about going there and having his picture taken with Mr. Amoroso, the Officer Crandall, and Mrs. C, the whole thing had been about as exciting as posing for some dopey class picture. Carlos went along too, getting the morning off from the Imperial, switching shifts with a friend. When Mr. Amorosa asked about their dad, Mrs. C stepped right up and said she was standing in for him, once again being their honorary grandma, and that her dear, dear friend Victor Arrow sent his deepest regrets from his brother's bedside in Florida. When Mr. Amorosa said he'd say a prayer for the uncle, Mrs. C made the sign of the cross. Knowing Mrs. C's theory about sin, Michael figured she'd be on her way to confession as soon as they were done. There were four photographers in front of Mr. Amorosa's building. Michael wore his white church shirt and a stiff collar and a tie Carlos had given him, one that was way too long for him. When they were in place on the front steps, Mr. Amorosa stepped to the microphone that had been set up there, even though there was no crowd to watch them, just as the photographers. He presented Michael with a baseball signed by the Yankees starting pitcher, including El Grande, and a Bronx Good Citizens plaque with Michael's name on it, and a brief description of how he had failed. That was the word they used, a robbery with courage and quick thinking. Then Mr. Amorosa made a brief speech in which he said pretty much the same thing that were written on the plaque. We hear all the time in the baseball about pitchers mowing batters down, Mr. Amorosa said. This time a fine young man from our borough mowed down a petty criminal who had preyed on this sweet old woman standing next to me. The ceremony took 10 minutes top. When they were done, Mr. Amorosa posed one more time, shaking Michael's hand as the photographers took their pictures. Then he wished him luck in the upcoming playoffs, even saying he might try to catch a game. Michael knew there was probably as much chance as that as Mr. Amorosa wading into the Harlem River and catching fish with his bare hands. When they were finished, Michael noticed that the cameras disappeared almost as quickly as Mr. Amorosa did. Carlos asked Michael if he wanted to ride back home in the car Mr. Amorosa office had provided. Michael said no. He and Manny would walk. Michael had asked Manny to tag along, knowing he would. This was a big event in Manny's eyes, even if it didn't include him. He lived for events of any kind, big games, school field trips, even if they involved going to the art museum, school plays, the opening of a new movie they really wanted to see, even if it meant getting permission to take the subway all the way to Times Square and pay their way into one of the massive theaters Manny called the Plexi. As soon as they were back on the street in front of 851 Grand Concourse, Michael yanked off his tie as if it had been a noose around his neck and stuffed it into his pocket of his old navy khakis. What did I tell you? Manny said. No problemo. Yeah, we had him all the way, Michael said. I wish I could get Mr. ACS man off my back that easy. We'll think of something, Manny said. You just keep thinking, Butch, Michael said to Manny, using one of his favorite lines from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, one of his favorite movies. That's what you're good at. You should have gone along with the brilliant idea about a fake dad, Manny said. Why? Michael said. So the fake dad can come up with a fake birth certificate. You know what I'm saying? Not always, Michael said, poking Manny with an elbow. They were in no hurry to get back to Girard Avenue. No hurry to do anything, really. The sound of the day, of the city, was all around them, as loud and busy as ever. It was another reason, Michael thought, why he loved baseball so much. Loved the idea that all the action didn't start until he started it, by going into motion. There he'd be, alone on the mound, the ball in his hand, the ball feeling as small sometimes as the palm of a marble, almost like he was alone in his own world, not even hearing the infield chatter from behind him. Sometimes Michael thought that two quiet places in his whole world were the pitcher's mound and the apartment at night before he put the Yankee game on. Manny said, well, are we going to talk about her ever? He poked Michael now, as if waking him. How much more can we talk about her? Michael said. She's not just a girl, she's El Grande's daughter. That happens to mean she's living in a whole different world than we're living in. But she's been hanging around in our world 'cause she wants to, Manny said. Nobody made her. Why couldn't she just have told us who she really was? Because, Manny said, she was probably afraid you'd get your panties in a wad exactly the way you are right now. He put both hands over his heart, put his head back, closed his eyes. Oh, he said, I'm just a poor Cuban boy from the wrong side of the subway tracks and am not worthy. That was as far as he got before Michael stepped back and gave him a soccer-style kick in the seat of his pants. Hey, Manny said, that actually hurt. Good. She likes you, Manny said now. It doesn't change who she is. I know, Manny said. She's the great man's daughter, and yet she keeps coming around. At least now we know why she only shows up on the days he was pitching, Michael said. She must come in with him instead of her mom, and they get a little boy just hanging around at the ballpark. I told you she likes you, Manny said. Deal with it. She doesn't like me enough to tell me the truth. Hey, jerkwad, Manny said. Maybe you've noticed people sometimes have a good reason for holding stuff back? As usual, when it turns into a debate, Manny had him. They had walked along enough now that the stadium was in front of them. Manny told Michael to hang on, ran into a convenience store, came out with a couple of Snapple iced teas with lemon, and handed one to Michael. Where do you suppose she lives? Manny said. Riverdale, Michael said. You know that? I read it in the papers. Riverdale, they both knew, was the most expensive part of the Bronx, like a whole different Bronx, up off of Henry Hudson Parkway, with the big old brick mansions looking like castles guarding the river below. Michael had seen those mansions once on a boat trip up the Hudson. Their sixth grade class had taken. She could have told me, Michael said, one more time, being stubborn the way he was with pitches sometimes, going for a particular corner of the plate instead of the outside, even when he was missing. You thick or what, Manny said. She probably only hangs around with kids who can get over the fact that she's El Grande's daughter. Look at her for yourself. Or herself. And then she finds us, and it's completely different. We don't know anything. We just like her for her. You and your faithful companion. Which would be you? Friends to the end, Manny said, and then 5 days after that. They touched their Snapple bottles together. I want to see her again, Michael said, even though the thought now scared him. Duh, Manny said. You think she'll come around when the Yankees are home next week? Duh, Manny said again. But what if she thinks I saw her on TV and now I know who she is, and she just doesn't want me to turn into another El Grande groupie? Star? What? Will you listen to me for a second? All I do is listen to you. I mean, really listen, Manny said. You got enough crummy stuff going on in your life. They won't even let you play right now. But Ellie isn't part of that. Ellie is a good thing, a good problem to have. Am I right? Michael mumbled his reply on purpose. I didn't quite catch that, Manny said. I said, you're right. Manny Cabrera, light on his feet as always, more graceful than all the people who called him No Neck knew, danced now on the Bronx Street corner. Michael's catcher celebrating as if he just scored a touchdown.